Welcome to episode 108 of the Untethered podcast. Today we have Theresa Richard joining us. Theresa is the founder and CEO of Mobile Dysphagia Diagnostics, a mobile fees company that has surfaced over 100 SNFs and helped over 90 SLPs start, grow, and scale their own mobile fees businesses through their Fees Biz Blueprint course. She's created the Swallow Your Pride podcast with over 2.2 million downloads. She's a board-certified specialist in swallowing and swallowing disorders and became an approved ASHA CEU provider. She started the Med SLP Collective with over 5,000 members and began employing and contracting with over 60 SLPs and support staff. She provides career and business coaching for SLPs through her Inner Circle Leadership Group and was invited to present at the Charleston Swallowing Conference on blogs and podcasts and has been asked to be an invited keynote speaker for several state conventions this year. She's also been invited to contribute to 2 papers for the Dysphagia Journal this year on assessing and treating dysphagia during COVID. She's been featured in Authority Magazine and Thrive Global and is excited to share the upcoming release of her new book for patients with dysphagia that will be available in April 2021. Quick disclaimer, all information, content, and material of this podcast are the opinions of the speakers and is for the informational purpose only and not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and or medical treatment of a qualified healthcare provider. Welcome to the Untethered podcast. I am your host, Hallie Balkin. I'm a certified orofacial myologist, feeding specialist, and mentor. This podcast is all about getting your questions answered and collaborating with colleagues to bring you the most up-to-date information in the orofacial myofunctional therapy, tethered oral tissue, and airway space. I challenge you to keep an open mind and join my mission to get this information out to the masses. Let's get started. Theresa, I am so excited to welcome you to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I know, I feel like we've talked about this for a while, and so it's finally happening.
I know. And I think you were on my podcast like a year ago, and I was like, I'll come on yours soon. And here we are 9 years later. So
I tell everyone I blame you for for my Feed the Peds. That was totally like your bug in my ear that I was like, nope, okay, fine.
Yeah, I'm like, if you don't do it, Hallie, I'm gonna find somebody to do it. So you better do it.
And it's been crazy. I mean, we've now launched it 4 times. I think we've had over 700, SLPs and OTs go through it in a year, and all during a pandemic. So, I'm excited about that. But why don't you share a little bit with us about your background? And I assume everybody listening knows who you are, but just in case they don't.
Yeah. So I guess I'm here today as a double-edged sword, as both an SLP / business owner, but also a mother of a little one with special needs who we've had our own hellish journey through probably, 20 SLPs at this point for feeding, speech, AAC, you name it. But anyways, I started out, I did my CF in the schools. I totally hated it and ended up, and I ended up just going with my supervisor to check out a skilled nursing facility one night. She was also working there, and she's like, I really think you would like it. And I ended up loving it. And I ended up staying at the same skilled nursing facility for 6 years. That really kind of just solidified my passion in old people, which is just what's still funny because that is still very much my passion. I'm so passionate about the skilled nursing setting, but then I have this son with special needs. So it stinks when I go to talk to, other SLPs and they just assume, oh, you're an SLP, you know all this stuff. And I'm like, no, but I don't. Like, this is not my jam at all. Like, I'm coming to you as just a normal mom. Like, please forget that I know anything about SLP because I don't know anything about kids. So, but anyways, from there, I ended up starting a mobile fees company, which I still own up in New York, and started the Swallow Your Pride podcast and started the Med SLP Collective membership site for medical SLPs just wanting more, information. And, part of that is we do have a little section on pediatrics and peds feeding. But obviously there was a much, much more greater need for just some real solid foundational knowledge. So I'm so glad that Hallie filled that need for you guys.
Absolutely. And, you made such a great distinction earlier about the difference between working with adults and working with peds, but even within pediatrics, there's a huge difference with working with a infant versus a toddler, and a toddler versus a preschooler. There's just so much change that happens in these early years. And, aside from the transition from milk to solid introduction, just the anatomy and the physiology and just so much growth. And, there's a lot of moving pieces at all times with these little ones. And so I actually specialized more so in the toddler population, the toddler and preschool population. And it wasn't until I had my own child with feeding struggles that I then really dove into the infant population. And so I think that that was such a great distinction that you made, that, you know, peds and adults are two different boats, but even within, and I'm sure that it's the same goes for adults based on, you know, diagnoses and what's going on in their medical charts. But, you know, even within pediatrics, it is a wide realm of differences
Yeah.
based on age and diagnosis and medical complexity. And so, you know, thank you for that distinction. I think it's really important to continue to highlight that, because I think we lose sight of that. And, you know, you also mentioned that you're a mama of a little one who has had his own journey. So can you share a little bit more about that with us?
Yeah. So my son was born with an extremely rare chromosomal abnormality. At the time he was born, I believe there was 7 documented cases. Now there's actually 19, which is still kind of wild. But we honestly had the most amazing neonatologist ever, in that she just said, we don't know what the future holds. It could be grim, it could be wonderful, and he could, be a thriving member of the community. So I think just having that outlook from the outset was wonderful. He was in the NICU for 15 days. We did not have an SLP. The only thing keeping him there was that he was on a feeding tube. So I would go into morning rounds every morning and I'm like, so what's the plan for discharging my son? And they're like, well, he has to learn to eat. And I'm like, okay, so what's the plan for teaching him to eat? And they're like, well, he'll figure it out. And I'm like, I find that very hard to believe.
Yeah.
So we played this round and round game. I finally convinced them to just let me pull the feeding tube and take him home and get therapy at home. It was horrible. We were not able to find SLPs that knew how to work with him. Not only that, but just, well, I don't specialize with babies. I don't specialize in infants. I only specialize with toddlers. And I get that. I really, truly do it because I'm so passionate about only, I'm very focused in adults and geriatrics basically, and fees, really, that's my jam. But I understand that, but there just is such a need for so many more people to get into this area. So, again, I'm going to keep plugging your course, Hallie, but again, it's one of those things that, like, if you have a passion for working with this population, like, please go seek out the training to get it, because there's so many parents that are desperate for your help. Yeah. He turned 5 2 months ago. I'd say in his 5-year life, he's had, I would say, 1 feeding therapist that really knew her stuff, that really knew what she was doing. And that's sad. It's really sad. And I don't blame people for trying, and we would have, at one point, I think he was having 23 therapy sessions a week between PT, OT, speech. It's just crazy. There's just, he has a lot of needs, and, I'm trying to just be the best mom I can to get him all of those services. But at the same token, I want the best bang for my buck, and I don't want them to be wasting our time. And I don't want them to be wasting their time either. So, we've had some SLPs come in and they're like, well, I don't really know what to do with him. Like, we could try this, I've heard about this. And I get that to a point. Like, I get a little bit of experimentation, but, like, you got to know what you're doing. So I've definitely fired more SLPs than I, care to talk about publicly, but it's really just because, not that they were bad people, they just didn't know what they were doing. And I didn't want them to waste our time, to be honest. So, that's really one of the, drivers for me starting the Medical SLP Collective too, is that I want SLPs to really know their stuff. Like, I want you to be so competent in what you're doing, because I really believe that competency leads to confidence as well. And I want you to be confident. I want you to show up at my house and say, yes, like, I know what we can do. Yes, he has weakness here. I'm going to start using words that I don't even understand, but, like, yes, we need to work on these areas. And I want you to be confident that you can help my child. Like, I think that's why we all became therapists, right? Like, we want to help people. We didn't just think, oh, maybe I'll show up and maybe I'll do something that helps them. No, like, you got there to help people. So
Yeah.
I don't know that was your question, Hallie, but that's the rant that I took. So
no, and I think that's really, I think it's still another important distinction, because, in my private practice, I will never send a therapist that is not competent and that is not confident that they can help this family. So,
yeah.
I have contractors who work for me, and we will say to them, hey, we have a kiddo, here are the needs, this is where they're located. do you want the case? And they know to say yes or no based on, obviously we all need to stretch ourselves a little bit. Like you said, we need to, so if it feels uncomfortable, that's one thing. But if we have the competency to
Yep,
take
yep,
on the
yep.
case, the confidence may come. And that's where, I never want to send a therapist into anybody's home that
No.
I do not believe. Like, I don't want to throw anybody into the fire, right? I
Yeah,
don't want to
yeah.
send them in. And that's something I pride myself on, is truly matching our patients with the therapist that can actually help them, that actually has the skill set. And that's, and I love that you're saying competence and confidence, because I've talked about this throughout the marketing for Feed the Peds, that we are creating competent, confident therapists. It's not enough to just take a course. You need to be able to become a critical thinker. You need to be able to see that patient, that little patient sitting in front of you, who maybe you've never heard of the diagnosis before, but you still need to know how to assess that patient and how to make sense of that information to then create an individualized treatment plan, both taking into account what the family desires and what you feel is appropriate based on your assessment. And so, there's a lot that we could talk about this all day, but, I've recorded a podcast on my 3 C's, I'm like, competence and community leads to confidence. And, I also feel like that community aspect, like what you've created with the Med SLP Collective and what we've created over here with our Feed the Peds alumni group, is so key as well. We need to have those other professionals in this space working day in, day out to go and bounce ideas off of, so that in additional education, so we can continue to grow our skill set. It's not enough to just take a course and think that we have all the knowledge in the world. No, we need to take it, we need to apply it, and need to start thinking critically, and that's one of the biggest things that I think we really pride ourselves on, is we're creating critical thinkers, because we see a lot of our students enter on day one, the SLPs and OTs, and they look like, a lot of them look like deer in the headlights. They're like,
Yep.
What have I gotten myself into? I really want to do this, but, and then, we see them about halfway through the program, their thinking changes. They start, we use case studies, and they're real kids, and, we'll use case studies to really drive home, this is how you might apply it. Now let's get on our weekly call and discuss the cases, and let's talk through what's coming up for you, and what, and they really drive those calls. And I think, again, it's that component that's missing. We don't have these graduate programs. I think there are 6 graduate programs that I'm aware of that have a pediatric feeding course.
Yeah.
Forget about like a whole, leg of courses.
Right.
Course. And what's even more upsetting is that within those, some of the individuals who are teaching these courses are basically not teaching EBP all the time. They're also not, they have very strong positions one way or another on, instead of teaching you about both sides of the discussion, it's very one-sided. And so I just think we need to do better as a profession. We need to be supplying this information. I mean, pediatric feeding is a huge part of our scope of practice. Why is nobody teaching this in grad school?
Right.
That's the part that just drives me up a wall.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and to go off of your EBP point, I think, I talk about one of the best feeding therapists that we did ever have. And, she came in very, she was almost intimidating when she came in. She took her job very seriously, and she just said, I do not have experience with this particular condition. But I've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of reading, and I do feel confident that I can help you guys. And I believe that her approach of being honest, but also she showed me that she was willing to work at it. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to just wing it and see what we can do. She was like, hey, I read these papers. I know that, this is some of the evidence we have. However, from my clinical experience, I also know that this might be a good thing, or this might be a good tool to use, or this might be a good product to recommend. So she was extremely well-rounded in where she was getting her knowledge from, from evidence, from clinical experience. And then just, she constantly wanted feedback from me too. And I think probably that was why she was my most favorite, was because it was very even on all sides of the evidence-based triad. And I just really, really appreciated that she wanted that sort of feedback from me as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's huge. I mean, it's hard to get vulnerable and to even say, hey, but you've said he was one of, was it 8 children that had, or 9? 7. Okay. So one of 7 children when he was born that had that diagnosis. So the chance of finding a pediatric feeding therapist in your area that's had
Right.
experience with this, like probably slim to none, right? So, the fact that she didn't just walk all up in there going like, I've got this, like I've seen this before. Well, no, you haven't seen this before. Like you don't know what you're dealing with until you really educate yourself. And that's how we gain competence. And, we need to be keeping up with the literature. We need to be keeping up with our coursework. We need to be keeping up with our colleagues in the field, and having those communities that allow us to have these actual conversations around information that's going to be beneficial to us as, for our growth, but also for our patients. And so, but I also love that you highlighted that part of that EVP triangle includes the feedback from the family. It includes the experience of the therapist, in addition to knowing the research or related research that's going to help you on this case. And that is getting, forgotten might be the word, I joke the EVP police are back and they forgot there's 5 levels of evidence-based practice. And, that includes case studies, that everything starts with a case study and then evolves from there. And if we lose sight of that, we lose sight of some really good research that's available to us. And we often hear, oh, there's no research in this space.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there is research. Maybe you're just looking in the wrong place, and maybe we do need more. However, there is research in a lot of these spaces. So it's a really great conversation. And, the other thing I'll say too, is we don't want to just rely on clinical experience, because if we get stuck in our ways, which some people do, and we've been in the field for 30 or 40 years, and we're not open to reading new research, taking new courses, or retaking courses we took 10 years ago that have probably been updated, that's also a problem, because we can't just fall back on just clinical experience.
I will say we did have an SLP that came in. She came for one visit, and you'll hear why. She came in and, she's like, well, I had heard something that this type of condition might come with a submucosal cleft. And I was like, yes, he does have one. And she's like, okay, well, we need to have that repaired first. And I was like, okay, well, but we already saw genetics, and she doesn't want to repair it until he's about 5 or 6 because it's not impacting anything right now. And she's like, well, I don't really understand how that's possible. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going by what the doctor said, and we've never had any trouble with it, so I'm going to trust the doctor. And she's like, okay, well, we need a modified barium swallow study. And I was like, all right, I'm going to pump your brakes here a minute, because I am board certified in swallowing. My child's never had an issue with swallowing. He's never had pneumonia, doesn't cough or choke when he eats. He just has so much weakness in his mouth that it's difficult for him to chew. It takes forever. I said, these are the types of exercises we need. I'm not concerned about swallowing. And we just could not get on, like we could not see common ground with that. And she's like, well, that's what I'm going to need before I would even know where to start with him. And I was like, okay, well, that's not happening. So I guess this is going to go nowhere.
Yeah. What is that going to tell you when his swallow comes back normal?
Yeah. So, but honestly, the thing is, and this is what I was telling the one SLP that I loved, is that it may have shown that he was aspirating. And I would not put it past him. If it did come back that my child was a functional aspirator, then it is what it is. He's never had pneumonia. I think we've had one sick visit to the peds in his entire life. So that's his functional baseline. So are we going to fix it? I mean, to me as a mom, we got a lot more fish to fry than something that's not causing us problems.
Yeah.
So I do stand very strong in those EVP values of getting the parent input, because that was not something that was important to me to try to fix that wasn't really broken at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so. Absolutely. And that's one of the biggest things I tell therapists too, especially early on. If you can't get the family or that support unit on board, your therapy's for nothing. Mm-hmm. They're going to see you for a very small period of time, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it is, once, twice a week. What about the rest of the time? If they're not implementing what you're giving them, if you don't have that family on board, you're wasting your time. Mm-hmm. You're not helping that patient.
Yep.
And it's, for me, it's more important to, yes, we have to go in and build rapport with the patient, but we also need to build rapport with whoever the caregivers are and find out what is most important to them. And again, like I said before, obviously we're not going to do anything that puts the patient in danger, but if you build rapport with the family, then you can have those conversations with the family also to discuss what you feel might be safe and what's realistic depending on what their desires are for the patient.
Yeah. I think, one thing I really super respected about her too was that she worked in the same office as my son's dietitian. And we were trying to do some funky things with his diet. We couldn't get him to gain weight. He'd never even been on the growth curve till last year. But she just asked me, where do you guys grocery shop most of the time? And I'm like, well, Trader Joe's is literally like I could walk there from our house. That's where we usually go. And she's like, okay. And the dietitian came up with a list of foods that the dietitian loved, that she also loved, that I could just easily get, that we could try, that she could try in her therapy, but that I would also carry over at home, because it wasn't some fancy food that I had to order. It was some food that I could grab easily off the shelf when I'm doing my grocery shopping, and also know that it's meeting his dietary needs. So I think, from that standpoint, I mean, we still use a lot of those foods, and that was probably 2 years ago. So I think that was just a really great example of really interdisciplinary collaboration on one kiddo and making life just so much friggin' easier for me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great, making life easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we have these kiddos who have complex medical needs, life is not super easy for the family. I mean, you guys, like you said, you were running him all over to umpteen appointments or having therapies in your home, and your life is constant therapy, because when therapy, when the therapist is not there, you're trying to implement. And it's, we've heard from a lot of our families, it's hard to have that downtime and just let the child be a child and not, constantly think about what do we need to be doing next. And so like we do recommend these types of strategies where what can you do to make what you're recommending easier to the family? Like keep them out of overwhelm. Let them know like we are their partner in this, and our goal is not to give them more work. Like, yes, obviously we're going to give you a plan and we're going to help you carry it out. But again, such a great like real world example of how we can make life just a little bit easier,
Yeah. And on that note, if I can add something too, a lot of your listeners are going to, create their private practices or work for a private practice. And I want to just reiterate please don't make the barrier to entry that much harder than it needs to be. And I'm going through that right now with a private practice agency. There's a specific therapist that I want to work with, does wonderful work. I know she's going to help my son. It's a 70-page intake form.
What?
And not only that, but there are questions on there that have absolutely nothing to do with why she is seeing him. And it's an online form and required fields. So I have to fill in something. So it's taken me, I've sat down to try to fill out the form about 5 times now, but it's so emotionally draining on me to have to look at these questions that I know my son can't do, that have absolutely nothing to do with why I want her to see him in the first place. And I can't just write like NA, like that's not an option. Like I have to write in a blurb or something. So to me, then, the therapist is like, are you going to fill out the paperwork? Like, do you just not want to get started? Like, no, I want to get started. I just can't get past the paperwork misery to even work with you. So at this point, it's like, as a mom that has, just think, I mean, she's one of 7 therapists that we're working with right now. Like if I have to do that for every therapist that my son works with, like he probably wouldn't get therapy because I don't have the emotional energy or the time to do that. So, I completely understand it's important to have intake information. Don't get me wrong, not what I'm saying at all. I'm always happy to fill out, a good summary, but I think don't overlook the importance of making the barrier to entry simple, but then also, have a conversation. Like a lot of this stuff I said to her, like, I'd love to talk to you more about this because it's not easy for me to delineate in a little form online, so I think it's just important to really make sure that there's time in there to discuss, this information, the intake form, do it over the phone, or make sure you set aside time during the eval. Don't just come at me with 4 standardized tests that my kid can't do and say he failed, because we went through that a few weeks ago too. And I was like, cool, we've gotten nowhere. Like I could have told you he couldn't pass any of these tests. Like, so just a little frustration.
Yeah.
Because then the flip side is, oh, well, I can't get patients. Like I'm having trouble, I do these evals, I'm having trouble with these patients, now wanting to come on and continue therapy. Don't make it a nightmare for the parents.
Yeah,
So.
No, absolutely. How long do you think it would actually take you minute wise to like complete that intake?
It would well over an hour. I mean,
Wow.
yeah.
I mean, that's absurd. I mean, and I own a private practice. We are private pay. We have an electronic intake. The goal is that it takes you like 5 minutes to complete everything from going through HIPAA, policies and procedures, and filling out all the medical history along with, and we try to make everything as like clickable and checkbox as possible with a couple areas for you to like elaborate, throughout. But then we also use that. That's part of, our assessment. So like you said, we want to take that, we print it off or we copy and paste over to Word and then print that off so that we can elaborate on that during the initial assessment. That is so important. I will also say not all of our children have formal evaluations done as part of their assessment, and we price things accordingly. We price based on whether we think it's going to be an hour, because we kind of know that the child coming in can't sit for more than an hour, and or these assessments are just not going to give us anything. So we want to do more of an informal assessment approach, and we want to talk with the family. We want to play with the child. We want to gather information that's going to be more beneficial to, whatever the therapeutic goals are for the family when they enter. But yeah, I think that's a really great point, because as a parent, like I had, my one kiddo went through PT, and we were going because of her, torticollis that was secondary to her tongue tie that was released. And it was the same kind of thing where, I was very appreciative of certain things and very frustrated by others, where they had paper forms still. And I was like, paper forms, like get with the program here. Like this day and age, I don't want to print something off, fill it out, scan it back to you, like send me a link that I can click through and just complete, and their forms weren't super long by any means, but I think we really need to be considering like this day and age, like where we're at with technology. Time. Like if you don't respect your patient's time, don't expect them to respect yours.
So, I actually asked if they had a paper packet because I wanted to just write a big X through the stuff that had absolutely nothing to do with him. So, I don't know if they're using it.
Can you do like space, enter, space, enter, space?
I tried like everything possible, and it was like, it was ridiculous, so but
well, maybe they'll listen to this podcast.
Maybe.
So if you're willing to share, will you talk to us a bit? I know that you've kind of been through a roller coaster just trying to get him pediatric feeding services in general, but are you willing to share what happened when the pandemic hit?
Yeah. So I feel like, it's been, how old was he at the time? 4 when the pandemic hit. And I feel like we had finally just made some amazing headway. We had such a great team of therapists. We had a great feeding therapist. We had a great speech therapist. We had a great OT. We had a great PT. He was going to preschool a few days a week. He had a wonderful special ed teacher. We just had like my quote unquote dream team for him. And then the pandemic hit. And I guess I should back up a little bit. I had found out about this physical therapy intensive program for my son that was down in Orlando, Florida. And we were on the wait list, I think, for like over a year. So he finally was able to get in there last February. So we just decided, I had literally just had a baby too. So I was like, we're going to pack up the whole family. We're going to, I'm not really working. I'm still kind of on maternity leave. We're going to pack up the baby. My parents went down. We stayed in a house for a month down in Orlando. He was in PT for 5 hours a day, every day for a month. So it was extremely intensive. We came out of that ended March 2nd. We drove back to New York, March 5th, March 6th, the lockdowns went into effect. So we went from this amazing PT experience where he had made incredible progress to all of a sudden, no therapy whatsoever. So if, depending on what state you're in, if you're in New York, they shut everything down. They stopped, closed the schools. They stopped all in-person services. They were trying to do quote unquote, teletherapy. Our PT that we had for him was just amazing. She was absolutely wonderful. And, she was trying to do stuff over the computer, but it's impossible for some professions, like she's trying to have me do things and she's like, do you feel this muscle firing? I'm like, I have no friggin' clue what I'm looking for. Like, I have no idea, so it was pretty awful. So kind of that whole month that, we had no school, no therapy, no nothing. I was trying to carry over anything I could from the intensive while also trying to run my company and care for a newborn on top of that. So it was pretty hellish, but yeah. But we had seen some behaviors from him that we had never seen before. And it was awful. And I think the hard part is he's so much smarter. He's much more intelligent than I think people, when they first meet him, think that he is. So after about a month of these just absolutely horrific behaviors, my husband was like, why don't we just, let's call the therapy clinic back down in Florida and see if they're still doing therapy. So I called them and they were just starting to open back up again. She's like, we feel confident with all of our, precautions and everything. And she's like, we just can't, figure out a way forward with these kids via teletherapy. We feel like they have to be seen in person. And, it was such a moral and ethical dilemma for me, because as an SLP, I was watching this whole pandemic unfold. I was seeing my colleagues, I was seeing people that work for the collective just watch the bodies line up, quote unquote, in these hospitals. And just, some of them even had COVID. And I know that they were living this most hellish, horrific experience at work. I was living this hellish, horrific experience at home with my child just flying off the rails because he was not stimulated, not getting any of the therapy that he needed. So we ended up packing up the whole family and going back down to Florida, where he was able to get therapy. I think, I don't know that we were, it's honestly such a blur. Maybe like a few days a week, if I can even remember, I don't remember. So we did that, I think, for about 2 months. And my husband was like, I feel like we, might need to move down here. And I was like, oh my God, no, we can't move down here. Mind you, we had literally just moved into a brand new house in New York too.
With the perfect therapy team, of course.
Right? Yes. We had moved into our dream house. We had our dream therapy team. But it's your dream therapy team, but what good is it if they can't help you, know? Right. So as we just kept getting word, they kept saying, we're going to extend the lockdowns. We're going to extend them. Like, in-person therapy isn't going to resume for a few more months. And I just kept thinking, like, my child made so much progress and he's 5 years old. Like, I can't wait a few more months. I can't be at the mercy of this game, really. And, these people were making these decisions based on, everyone says follow the science, but these decisions were not based on the science. Yeah. It's you think of, you think of the nursing homes, you think of the hospitals, you think of outpatient clinics, and SLPs and other therapists are in full PPE seeing their patients. We came down to Florida and that was exactly it. These therapists were in full PPE. I mean, we weren't allowed in there. We had to do temperature checks. We had to fill out very rigorous questionnaires every single day. But we did what we had to do to make it work for my son. And nobody in the entire therapy clinic got sick. None of the therapists were. I think it was and I know people are going to be judgmental of this, but we did what we knew was best for our family. And I can't imagine where our family or where my son would be today had we not made that decision for him. Because I know they just literally started in-person therapy back up a few weeks ago. With the therapist that we would have had in New York. So my son would have been an entire year without therapy. And I honestly don't know that me and my husband would still be together. I think after that month of the horrible behaviors, it was just like, what are we going to do? The whole family was falling apart. So I think you just do what you have to do for your family at the time. So
absolutely,
that's what we did.
Yeah. Well, and look, you're going to be judged one way or the other, right? Whether you did it or whether you didn't, like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So I always say, you got to do what's best for you, what's best for your family. And only you know that. Nobody knows what's best for Theresa or your son or your, marriage or your family situation. So, I'm happy to hear that he was able to get the therapy he needed. And, I think everybody's living their own different realities during this pandemic. And I think the most important thing we can all do is just, take a chill pill and remember that our reality is not somebody else's reality. And we just can't compare. We can't compare from one household to the next. Some households are dealing with teens who are in deep depressions and they need to be in school. And there's people who have medical complexities that absolutely need access to medical care that they've not been able to get. And, and then there's moms who are homeschooling, who are at their wits' end and, they have all this anxiety and, every single situation is real. And I think we all need to just step off of judging each other and recognize that we're all doing the best with what we have in front of us right now. And so, I love that you shared that, and you're getting very real, because you do, when we share things like this, we put ourselves out there to the world, and we know everybody judges one way or the other. But I think we all need to realize that we're a year in, and while some places are just reopening, now we're off into spring break, and people are traveling all over the place. So what's going to happen in, a week or two when everybody comes back from spring break? Are we going to shut down again when somebody gets like a case of COVID in the schools? I mean, we're living in this unknown right now. We don't, and so the best we can do is just what's best for our families. So thank you for being vulnerable enough to share that. And I'm glad he was able to get at least some services during this past year, even if it looked different than what you had anticipated. So
I think, me and my husband were just actually talking last night about it. I mean, my son started school here in August, and it's been, he's almost done with the school year. There's only, 2 months left. And it's just crazy to think, there's been no cases at his school the whole time. But these kids just desperately, he goes to a school for kids with severe special needs. Like I can't imagine what these kids or what these families would do without the support that we get from the teachers and the therapists at school. So I understand it's very controversial, but it's what we had to do that was best for our family. So I'm not ever gonna, I don't really care what you have to say about that, actually. So
and I mean, I also think it depends where you live, right? I mean, where you live is highly dictating people's perceptions of the situation. And we're not downplaying COVID. We're not downplaying that there have been deaths. We're not downplaying that this is a disease, or that, medicine is important. Nobody's downplaying that. But if you live in the state of Maryland, it's been shut down. Our schools just started rolling out and like opening back up a couple weeks ago, and it was a phased entry, to the point where I don't think the high schoolers are all back yet. I think they're coming soon. And I'm like, for what? Our schools end in 2 months and we're going into spring break right now. I mean, I get it. Like, get them back in the schools if that's where they want to be. But not even all the spots are filled. Families are keeping their kids home in fear of sending them to in-person schooling. So it's also a mentality of, you are who you're surrounded by. You are what you listen to. And so I think we need to keep in mind that there are ways for people to live their lives differently based on the information that they have and they feel safe with. And and
that's totally where we are. I think there was only like a few thousand cases total. I mean, the county that we're in just had such minimal impact, and I don't know the reasons why. It just, there was not widespread here, which was great. We went down to Miami for a friend's birthday, and you understand why they have billions. I'm probably misquoting, but you understand why they have so many cases, because people are acting so reckless there. I mean, we drove in there and my husband's like, okay, I don't think we're gonna be hanging out. Okay. I mean, you make responsible decisions, but it was very fascinating, being in a county that did not have a lot of cases. And I'm obviously grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the way that they handled everything at my son's school, and they still are.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course.
So is there anything else, like anything that you could say to like a top tip or two to a therapist that maybe wants to get into pediatric feeding, but either is fearful of it or has maybe taken the courses, but still has no idea how to assess and treat? I mean, I have, earfuls to share with them, and this is often what I market to and preach to, but any tips as like a mama, you're a mom SLP of a kiddo who's got these needs, anything you would share with them? Any tips?
I think as I actually just finished up like a leadership mini course that's going to be launching today, actually. But I think one of the main points that I always say is action breeds clarity. And I think you can sit and just play this analysis paralysis of what should I do? Do I know enough? Should I work for myself? Should I go work for somebody? What should I do? And I think put the wheels in motion. Go start talking to people, go apply to some private practices, go apply to different hospitals. I hear so many people talk themselves out of things before they're even presented the opportunity. It's like, well, I don't know if I want to work at this hospital. Well, did you apply? Do you know if they even want you? know, oh, well, I was presented, you know, with this job offer. I don't know if what I want to do. Well, did you ask what the salary is? Like, did you ask what the PTO is? You know, I think people just I don't know what it is about SLPs. And this is a very obvious overgeneralization, but we just get into this overthinking and overanalyzing. And I feel like if we just stopped the madness and actually helped the people that we could help, your life would be so much better. And I know for me, like once I got out of my own stupid way and I just realized that I'm really friggin' smart in my one area and I'm very strong and I know that I can help a lot of people in this specific area. I started my own business and I made 6 figures right away. I mean, I made a lot of money. I helped a ton of patients. I'm still friends with a lot of families that I worked with at the time. You know, so I think that's my one piece of advice is to just get out of your own head and realize you have the skills to help a lot of people. And there's so many people that need your help. I think, you know, I've gotten, I don't want to say off of Facebook, but I don't spend nearly 1% of the time on there that I used to, because it can be very toxic and competitive. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like there are people out there are parents out there are family members out there that are desperate for the services that you have. And even if you're not totally competent in it, if you're one course away from being super competent in it, go take that course. Like if you're hesitant, you know, I don't know if I have the time to take this 12-hour course, or I don't know if I have a few $100, like if that is the barrier to entry for you to helping so many other people, like there are so many families out there that would really, really appreciate you. You know, and I think we obviously could talk forever and ever about this too, but, you know, making what you're worth too, charging what you're worth. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of therapists that I've worked with that are private paid. I have no idea how much I even pay them. Like to tell you the truth, they could be charging me $1,000 a session for all I friggin' know. Like, I'm kidding. I'm joking, but they're just very, very good at what they do. And I know that they charge their worth and they feel very fulfilled. Like I tell, you know, I tell some of the girls that I mentor too, and I say girls because they are only girls, so I'm not being sexist, but if you're not fulfilled in what you're doing, and if you don't feel like you're being paid enough, you're not going to keep doing it. Yeah. Like if you're not making enough money to feed your family, to live the lifestyle that you want, you're going to be looking for other things and you're not going to come back next week when I need you. So I want the therapists that are changing my son's life to feel fulfilled. I want them to charge what they're worth. I want them to, you know, be able to live the life that they want to because they're doing good work in the world. You know, and I know you feel the same way I do, and I don't think that was your question, but that's again the rant that I chose. So
it's all good. You know what? A simple question leads to, you did answer the question and then you went beyond, which I love. I love
Okay.
We're good. No, but I think that's also, you know, I've had some podcasts where I've talked about money and making money in a helping profession was one of those podcasts. And I'm like, it's not discussed enough. People say, oh, you didn't get into the SLP profession to make money. You got into the SLP profession to help people. I'm sorry. Everything is a business. So you know what? Like you said, you have to make enough to one, feed your family, pay your bills, but also you need to live your life. And I'm not saying that you should be overcharging your patients so you can go buy a Lamborghini. I'm saying you should be making enough that you're not living paycheck to paycheck every month. And that you, like you said, that you're excited, that you feel like you're getting paid your worth, because that's been very important to me. I pay my contractors at the top end. I'm one of the highest paying in my area. And I know that because I was a contractor. I went through all this. I know what people were paying. And I've also kept up to speed with that. And guess what? As a contractor getting paid the high end of what contractors get paid in my area, I was excited to work for somebody else. I was excited to, go and do my job because I felt like I was valued. And then being the business owner, I was like, I want to have that. I want to instill that same feeling in my team. I want them to recognize that I value them. So my team gets paid for the time they spend evaling and double that for writing a report, which is unheard of in a lot of private practices. Most people don't pay anything for writing a report, or they underpay a very tiny, chunk of money for an eval, a full eval, regardless of the amount of time spent in eval or writing the report. And yes, that there's, from a business standpoint, yes, I have you get paid for 1 hour report writing or 2 hour report writing based on how much time you actually spent and how many evals, a formal eval or whatever different areas were assessed. But people always say, oh, okay. Like they've never heard of that before, so I always say, look at what your business as a business owner can do where you're still making money as a business owner and getting paid your worth as, the person running the practice. But what other things can you do to also demonstrate to your team that you value them, that, you want them to feel good about the work they do and that they should be commanding a certain fee for their services, because you can't just go replace them with any random person. You need to find another highly skilled person to take their place. So, if they decide to just up and leave you one day, which happens. But yes, no, I think that's a very under discussed topic, one that I've been trying to shed more light on because, look, the reality is there are some private practices that take insurance and they can only offer you so much because in order to keep their lights on, that it is what it is. But then there's other practices where they might have some wiggle room. Maybe they get a really great insurance reimbursement, or maybe they have higher private pay fees and they have some wiggle space for those who ask. And for those who, are doing an awesome job and the families really love you, I've had therapists come to me and I've said, what, let me just look at the financials and get back to you. And in that space, I have been able to give raises to certain therapists who really work their butts off and they really go, they go above and beyond for their families. I want to compensate them well. But I think that also, begs the question of, why therapists who are just getting started in private practice often feel like they don't have enough experience as a private practice owner, and that for some reason should dictate their fee. Because I've had this conversation with coaching clients of mine where I said, the number of years that you've owned a private practice are completely irrelevant. How much experience, how specialized are you in the type of therapy you're delivering? You've been in the field for 15 years. You need to charge like you've been in the field doing this for 15 years. So there's that component also to think of. But yeah, this gets me fired up because I hate to see people burnt out, because that's what happens. You get burnt out.
And what I see too, I help people start mobile fees businesses, and I've just seen so many businesses fold up. And I asked, how much are you charging? And they'll tell me, and I'm like, well, there's your answer right there. You're never going to run a profitable, sustainable business charging that. And a lot of us we aren't business owners. Me and you are, but SLPs in general are not. Me and you have spent exorbitant amount of money for business guidance and business coaching, but SLPs haven't. And they don't understand that there are so many other things, charges that go into running a business, that if this is just your fee and you think that this is what you're going to take home, you're out of your mind. There's taxes, there's overhead, if you're running a fees company, there's equipment charges, there's daily, disposable charges, there's tons of other charges that people don't consider. So, when people, say things like, oh, they're charging too much, that just shows how, unknowledgeable you are about the topic, because there's many, many other things that go into it. Yeah. So like you said, we're not taking our fees and buying Lamborghinis. So
right. Exactly. It's like cost of doing business, And arguably, for those who don't really understand how business is often run, a lot of us put money back into the business. A lot of us are putting money back into our teams. A lot of us are putting, there's a lot of behind. And I tell people all the time these days, because they say, how do you do it all? And I'm like, I don't. I have a team.
Correct.
I have a team that makes me look really good. There's a team that helps me with the podcast. There's a team that helps me with the online business. I've got a team helping me with my local private practice. I mean, no single person is Superwoman or Superman. You can't do all of this by yourself. I mean, you'll die trying. Like, you will literally drive yourself into the ground. There aren't enough hours or enough energy in the day. And I don't advise on that at all. I always advise on build a team as fast as you can, because you will thank me later.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. I know we can always chat for hours and hours and hours
I know.
on end. Are there any last tidbits you want to share that we didn't talk about?
I don't think so. I think I gave you all my rants that I wanted. So
fabulous. So where can they find you if they're interested in like learning more about your leadership course you just mentioned, or SLP Collective? We'll put it in the show notes too.
Okay. Crap. I'm a horrible business owner. I don't even know the links to where you can find this stuff. You guys, holy cow. Anyways, Swallow Your Pride podcast is swallowyourpridepodcast.com. I will get you the links to we're not actually open for enrollment with the collective right now. We'll be opening that, I believe, May 21st. That'll be medslpcollective.com. You can get on the wait list there. But we do have some other things I got going on that I would love to share with you, and we'll get those in the show notes. So thank you, Hallie.
Absolutely. And if they're on like the wait list for the MedSLP Collective or the podcast, will they get information about your other courses? Or
yes.
Okay,
yes. Yep.
All right. So medslp.com or Swallow Your Pride.
medslpcollective.com or swallowyourpridepodcast.com. Yes.
medslpcollective.com or swallowyourpridepodcast.com.
Right? Yeah, you got it. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll put that in the show notes for you guys. Thanks so much, T.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you want to hear more of these Myo, Tots, Airway, and feeding related episodes, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or pledge a small amount on patreon.com/the Untethered Podcast. If you found value, others you know in this space will too. So be sure to share this episode on your social media platforms and join us over on Facebook, on my Facebook page at Hallie Bulkin Biz, on Instagram at Hallie Bulkin, and you can head over to theuntetheredpodcast.com to grab a copy of the show notes, where you can also subscribe to be kept up to date on the latest podcast episodes.